Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking into Professor Ente Hsu's book on succession planning. I found it to be a fascinating read, especially for those who want to build something that lasts. We're talking insights from biblical wisdom, real-world business examples, all sorts of things.
It is quite the mix. Multiple forewords from some pretty big names. And it's not just theories. We get stories about companies from Taiwan to the global stage. And then these deep connections to biblical figures like Isaac and Moses, even Queen Elizabeth I popped up.
Yeah, I was struck by that statistic early on, the one about the average age of CEOs.
Oh, you mean in Taiwan's top companies?
Yeah, almost 65. I mean, it makes you think, are we doing enough to prepare the next generation of leaders?
That's exactly what Professor Hsu's book tries to do. 4 core principles, 18 secrets woven within them. He even uses the Chinese term horse succession secrets.
Okay, so instead of just listing out all 18 of them, how about we dive into some of the stories and takeaways from each of the 4 principles? I'm really curious, how these biblical figures and companies today, how they connect.
Sounds good. Let's start with principle 1. Setting the stage for succession. It's about getting the right person ready to take over. And the first secret is called adapting to the environment. And it all starts with, believe it or not, the story of Isaac marrying Rebekah.
I have to admit, when I first saw that, I thought, what does a biblical marriage have to do with business? But Professor Hsu makes the point that it's about gaining experience, continuously improving, and even, yes, balancing love with wisdom.
And he uses the example of Luo Kairen, who took over the Zengson tire company. His dad actually sent him to Japan to learn from a top tire manufacturer there. Classic succession move.
Yeah, but what's interesting is how that experience shaped Luo's leadership. I mean, in Japan, he saw a level of quality, a focus on the customer that was totally different from back home. So when he came back, he brought these new ideas, this fresh perspective, turned out to be super important when he finally took over.
It's that independent growth outside the shadow of the old leader. Professor Hsu contrasts that with Queen Elizabeth I. Now, she was powerful, no doubt, but never married, never named an heir.
Makes you wonder, right? Did her focus on being so strong on her own, did that become a blind spot when it came to the future leadership of England?
Good question. Maybe it shows we need to balance individual excellence with long-term vision. Professor Hsu even brings up the idea of localize. Have you heard of that?
Localize? Yeah, rings a bell, but refresh my memory. How does it connect here?
It's having a global vision, but being sensitive to the local situation too. Like how Luo Kairen brought those ideas from Japan, but applied them in the context of his company and market. That's glocalize.
So how might our listeners use this glocalize idea in their own careers, their goals?
Oh, totally. Be open to learning from different cultures, different perspectives, but then, adapt those insights to your own situation. Whether you're leading a team, building a business, or just figuring out your own life, it can really help.
Okay, let's move on to secret 2. Cultivating a value-driven mindset. This one's all about purpose. But Professor Hsu says finding your purpose, it's not always easy. He uses Rebekah as an example. She struggled with infertility for years after marrying Isaac.
He even brings up the verse from Genesis 25:21 where Isaac prayed for his wife and she conceived.
And she even asks, why am I even alive? Which I think a lot of people can relate to, even if their struggles are different.
For sure. Professor Hsu then connects this to Moses, who also faced a lot of uncertainty. He reminds us that difficulties are going to come, and he even mentions the verse from James 1:2-4 about considering it joy when you face trials because it produces perseverance and makes you mature.
So the challenges actually make your sense of purpose stronger if you let them.
Exactly. And he highlights 3 key takeaways from all this: accepting responsibility, embracing change, and finding the why behind what you do.
He then brings up this very interesting company, Salvatore Ferragamo, a huge fashion brand built by a family, all working together. What's interesting is that there wasn't a clear plan for who would take over when the founder passed away.
That's where his wife Wanda comes in. No formal business background, but she knew it was her duty to continue her husband's legacy.
And she didn't just pick one person. She got all 6 of their children involved, each with their own strengths. They built on what Salvatore had started. It's almost like Ecclesiastes 4.9 where it says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor.
I like that connection. Shows the power of working together and having a shared vision, especially in a family business.
It really makes me think about what value means in our own work. Is it just about making money, or is there more to it? Are we building something that will last, that will really have an impact?
Big questions. Professor Hsu wants us to think about those things. It's not just about success in our jobs. It's about doing work that matches our values, finding that deeper purpose.
Okay, we've talked about adapting, finding purpose. What about secret 3? Finding the right positioning. Professor Hsu uses Emperor Yao from Chinese history to explain this.
Emperor Yao, known for being wise and humble. He chose his successor based on merit, not family ties. He saw that Shun, even though he came from humble beginnings, had what it took to be a great leader. Like Proverbs 28.2, when the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan.
So it's about looking deeper, being open-minded, seeing the potential that maybe others miss?
Yes. And Professor Hsu connects this to Chen Ronghua from Zhengshan Tire. This guy really understood what customers valued.
So he wasn't just focused on selling tires. He was providing a solution to their needs. He developed this golden triangle strategy.
Can you explain that a bit for our listeners?
Absolutely. It's about ensuring 100% quality, 100% service, and 100% trust. It was a complete approach, focused on the long term, not just quick sales.
And that really worked. Zhengshan became hugely successful.
Professor Hsu even links this to Ephesians 4.7, which says, "But to each one of us grace has been given as Christ apportioned it." It's like saying, we all have unique gifts, and finding the right position is about embracing those gifts and using them to do something bigger than ourselves.
That's a great message for everyone, I think. Have you ever felt that pressure to fit in, to be what everyone else wants you to be? Finding the right position means having the courage to be yourself and find where you can really shine.
Now, secret 4, mastering the art of survival amidst difficulty. Here, Professor Hsu talks about Emperor Shun, who faced so much adversity growing up, but ended up being a great, compassionate leader.
Professor Hsu even compares it to his own struggles writing this very book. He was dealing with writer's block when he had a breakthrough during a trip to India.
It's always interesting to hear about an author's process. Makes them seem more human, more relatable.
Yeah. He was really stuck with the book's direction when he suddenly thought about Joshua. It was like a new path opened up for him. He realized he'd been limiting himself, and that led to a fresh start.
Reminds me of Li Fanquan from the Youngson Group. He took over his family's business, a pharmaceutical company, after his father died. And he didn't just try to keep things the same. He saw potential for growth and new things.
And that's when he really took off. Embraced new technologies, took the company global. He even got inspiration from the book of Proverbs, specifically Proverbs 16.3. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans.
What made him successful was honoring his dad's legacy while adapting to how the industry was changing. It's a tricky balance.
Definitely is. And it makes me wonder how our listeners have faced adversity. Did it break you, or did it make you stronger? What did you learn?
I think we all have moments where we have to adapt, where we have to push through tough times. And a lot of times, those moments are what make us the leaders we become, even if we don't realize it at the time.
Now that we've talked about setting the stage for succession, let's move on to Professor Hsu's second principle, opening wide doors of opportunity. This one's about, setting yourself up for long-term growth.
I like that. It makes you think about possibilities. Professor Hsu has 4 more secrets here, but I'm drawn to the stories he uses to explain them.
The stories are definitely interesting. He brings up the Rothschild family, Jack Welch, Andy Grove, even a female leader in a male-dominated industry.
Okay, let's start with the Rothschilds. They weren't just successful. They built this huge financial empire that spanned across continents during really chaotic times in Europe.
Their success comes down to a few key things. They were really good at spotting and seizing opportunities, understanding how money and power flowed, and they were willing to take calculated risks. It reminds me of the verse in Proverbs 21.5, "The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty."
But they didn't just take risks, did they? They also had this incredible network of agents and partners all over Europe.
Right. That network let them get information, move assets, and handle these complex financial transactions with amazing efficiency. It was like having their own secret intelligence service.
So they really got the power of collaboration and strategic alliances. And they managed to stay united as a family, even as they grew and spread out.
Another key point. They had a clear hierarchy and a system for governing things that made sure their business continued from one generation to the next. Almost like Deuteronomy 17.18-20, where it talks about the king of Israel studying and following the law so he could have a long and successful reign.
I'm seeing a pattern here, adapting, making alliances, thinking long-term. It's not about quick wins. It's about building something that lasts.
Speaking of thinking long-term, let's jump ahead and talk about Jack Welch. How he handled succession planning at GE.
Jack Welch. a legend in the business world, the guy who made GE a global force.
Yeah.
But wasn't he known for his pretty tough management style?
Yeah, he was famous for his rank and yank system, where he was always evaluating employees and firing the ones at the bottom. But his way of planning for his successor was actually pretty different.
Really? How so? I'm curious.
Instead of choosing someone in secret, he had this process where he really tested the top contenders.
It wasn't just about who looked good on paper.
Nope. He brought the final 3 candidates to a 3-day retreat and put them through all these challenges, made them think strategically, explain their visions for GE, and show they could lead.
Sounds intense. Like a Succession TV show, but with way more at stake.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And that's how he chose Jeff Immelt, who ended up leading GE for 16 years. I guess it was a good trial by fire.
It's so different from how the Rothschilds did things, their whole family dynasty. But what's similar is creating opportunities for future leaders to step up and prove themselves.
It's giving them a chance to show what they can do, a place where those leadership qualities can be tested and seen, like the story of David and Goliath. David wasn't the obvious choice to fight the giant, but he did it and showed everyone how strong and brave he was.
That's a great way to look at it. And talking about facing challenges, what about Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel? Didn't he say only the paranoid survive?
He did. One of his famous sayings. Grove believed that to stay alive in the tech world, companies need to always be on edge, ready for anything that could disrupt things.
Always looking ahead, even when things are good.
Right. He even encouraged his team to have what he called constructive paranoia, always questioning things, looking for potential threats, and pushing for innovation.
I can see how that mindset would be crucial in a field like that, where things change so quickly.
Grove also had this interesting view of failure. He saw it as a way to learn and grow. He even said, success breeds complacency. Complacency breeds failure.
That's a powerful statement. So it's not about avoiding failure, but about learning from it when it happens.
He believed companies should maximize the value of failure. Analyze what went wrong and use those lessons going forward. Like Proverbs 24.1 scene, for though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again, but the wicked stumble when calamity strikes.
It's all about resilience, right? Bouncing back and moving on, even when things are tough.
And lastly, let's talk about a different kind of leadership challenge taking over in a male-dominated field. Professor Hsu tells the story of Zhao Mingming from Song Baiyuan, who broke those barriers and had amazing success.
I'm so glad we're talking about this. It's important to show women breaking through and achieving great things.
Definitely. Zhao Mingming took over her dad's agricultural company and made it grow tremendously. Some people resisted her, but she never let that stop her.
I'm curious what helped her succeed. How did she deal with that challenge?
Well, first, she knew the business inside and out. She worked her way up, gaining experience in all parts of the company. Just like Proverbs 12.24 says, the hand of the diligent will rule, while the slothful will be put to forced labor.
So she had that solid base to work from.
Yes. And besides that, she had a sharp strategic mind. She saw potential in new markets and wasn't afraid to make big moves to expand the company.
Sounds like she really lived up to that idea of opening wide doors of opportunity.
She did. And she knew how to build a strong team and give people the power to do their best. She realized she couldn't do it all herself and surrounded herself with talented people who shared her vision for the company. Kind of like in Exodus 18.13-26, where Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, told Moses to delegate some of his work so he wouldn't get burned out and could lead better.
She sounds like an amazing leader,
Yeah.
breaking barriers and succeeding on her own terms.
Her story reminds us that leadership isn't about being male or female. It's about having a vision, being determined, and inspiring and empowering others.
Before we move on, let's bring it back to our listeners. What stands out to you from these stories?
What can you take away and use in your own journey toward opportunity and growth?
Do any of these leaders' challenges remind you of your own, in your work or personal life? What can you learn from how they handled those obstacles and created opportunities?
Take a moment to think about these questions. Maybe write down your thoughts, talk to a friend about it, and most importantly, think about how you can put these insights into action.
With all those great questions to think about, let's move on to the next principle. This one really gets to the heart of creating a lasting impact that goes beyond our lifetimes.
Professor Hsu calls it building an enduring legacy. It's about moving beyond personal achievements and making a contribution that really matters.
I'm excited to explore this, but it's also a bit intimidating, How can we make sure our work continues to have an impact even after we're gone?
Professor Hsu tackles that big question with a mix of history and practical advice. He starts with Emperor Yongzheng from the Qing dynasty. He's an interesting figure.
What makes him stand out when we're talking about legacy and succession?
Well, he inherited this huge, complex empire that was facing a lot of problems. Corruption, economic instability, threats from both inside and outside. It was a lot to handle.
It sounds like he had a tough job ahead of him. So how did he approach it?
Yongzheng was smart and decisive. He put in place all these reforms to make the government run better, strengthen the economy, and make the military stronger. And what's interesting is that he knew these reforms wouldn't work if he just forced them on everyone from the top down.
So he understood he needed people to support him. Having a good plan isn't enough. You have to get people on board.
Exactly. He made a point of talking directly to his people, explaining his decisions and listening to their concerns. He also worked on developing a strong, loyal group of officials, giving talented people the power to carry out his vision. He understood the idea from Proverbs 29.4, the king is established by justice, but he who exacts bribes tears it down.
It's like he was building a foundation for a better future, not just for himself, but for generations to come.
Yes, he was thinking about the long-term impact of his actions. His reign is actually seen as a turning point in Chinese history. It shifted things from decline to a new era of growth and stability. It's fascinating how a leader's actions can have these ripple effects that last way beyond their time in power.
Makes you think about the legacy we're all creating. Right?
Yeah.
Whether we realize it or not. Are we building something that will stand the test of time? Or are we just focused on what's happening right now?
That's a question we should all think about. Okay, let's talk about a different kind of legacy, one based on integrity and strategic thinking. Professor Hsu talks about Zhuge Liang from the Three Kingdoms period in China.
I've heard of him. He was like this brilliant military strategist. Could outsmart anyone on the battlefield.
Yeah, he was a skilled tactician, but there was so much more to him than just that. Zhuge Liang was known for his loyalty, his sense of justice, and his deep compassion for the people. Like it says in Psalm 72.4, may he defend the cause of the poor of the people, give allegiance to the children of the needy, and crush the oppressor.
He sounds like a true leader. Someone who inspires people not just because of their skills, but because of who they are.
Truly exceptional. And his story is full of examples of his smart strategies and his strong integrity, even when facing seemingly impossible odds. He knew that true leadership wasn't about protecting himself. It was about serving something greater than himself.
That's a powerful idea, especially today when it's easy to get caught up in personal gain and climbing the ladder of success.
Professor Hsu's point is that building a lasting legacy means putting the needs of others ahead of your own. It's about having a positive effect on the world around you.
It's not just about what we can achieve. It's about making positive change happen in the world.
To illustrate this, Professor Hsu tells this very interesting story about the Potsdam Mill in Germany. Might seem like an odd example, but it makes sense when you hear the details.
I'm curious, what's so special about a mill?
Well, this mill was in a place with no river nearby, which you usually needed back then to power a mill.
So how did they run it? Seems like a pretty big problem.
They came up with a really clever solution. They used wind power. They built this system of windmills and gears that let them grind grain even without a river.
Wow. Turned a problem into an advantage. They adapted and found a new way, which is something we've been seeing a lot.
Exactly. Professor Hsu uses this as a metaphor for being resourceful and adapting, which are often needed to build a lasting legacy. We might not always have the perfect resources or conditions, but we can overcome those challenges by thinking differently and trying new things.
So limitations don't have to define us. We can see them as chances to grow and come up with new ideas.
Now let's look at a more recent example of legacy building, one focused on making a difference in society. Professor Hsu highlights Huang Zusong and the Eden Foundation.
I don't know much about the Eden Foundation. What do they do?
Huang Zusong started it with the idea of creating a society that's more inclusive for people with disabilities. He understood that a legacy isn't just about money or accomplishments, it's about how you improve the lives of others.
Leaving the world better than you found it, right? Creating something that helps and empowers others.
And he really walked the talk. He created a network of social enterprises that gave jobs to people with disabilities, allowing them to contribute to their communities and live more fulfilling lives.
So it's about empowering people, not just giving them charity. It's about seeing the value and potential in every person.
Absolutely. And Huang Zusong's legacy goes beyond the programs he created. He inspired so many others to see the potential in people with disabilities and work towards a more inclusive and compassionate world.
That's the kind of legacy that truly matters. Changing hearts and minds, shifting how people see things, and creating a ripple effect of positive change.
Before we move on, let's pause and ask you, our listeners, what does legacy mean to you? What do you want to be remembered for? What mark do you want to leave on the world?
That's a big question, but it's worth thinking about. Do you think building a legacy is only for CEOs or famous people? Or can we all try to create a positive, lasting impact no matter what our job is or where we come from?
What can you do today to start building a legacy that reflects your values and what you hope to achieve? Think about it.
Write down your ideas. Talk to someone you trust. And most importantly, start taking action to make your vision a reality. We all have the power to create a legacy, big or small.
Now, let's look at the last principle in Professor Hsu's book, Cultivating Sustainable Succession Power. This part gets into the personal qualities that help individuals and organizations succeed in the long run.
So we're shifting from external strategies to the internal stuff that makes those strategies work.
You got it. Professor Hsu says that sustainability isn't just about having the right systems, it's about developing a mindset and values that help people adapt, grow, and thrive over time.
It's about building that inner strength and resilience so you can get through the tough times and come out stronger.
He explores this idea through 4 more secrets, each one focusing on a different aspect of this sustainable power. We'll go into some really compelling examples that might spark some new ideas for our listeners.
That's what we're here for. Let's get into it.
So we've covered a lot in our deep dive into Professor Hsu's succession secrets. I mean, from biblical marriages to windmills, it's quite a range.
It is, isn't it? I think what makes Professor Hsu's book so interesting is that he doesn't just talk about the how-to of succession planning. He goes deeper, to the principles behind lasting success. It's not just about handing over a business.
That's right. It's about making sure that whatever you're building, a company, a nonprofit, or even your own personal legacy, lasts and has an impact. He's giving us a way to create something that endures.
And he does it by using all these different sources: biblical stories, historical figures, business leaders today, even things from his own life. It makes the book both useful and really inspiring.
I agree.
I especially like how he makes it clear that this isn't just for CEOs or people inheriting companies. It's for anyone who wants to create something that goes beyond their own lifetime and their own efforts. It's about having a vision that's bigger than just ourselves.
Exactly. Professor Hsu keeps coming back to that point. It's about knowing what we're good at, finding the right place to use those skills, and building something that helps everyone, not just ourselves.
Finding that balance between what we love to do and what the world needs. But he's honest too, right? He says it's not always going to be easy.
Of course not. There'll be challenges, times when things go wrong, and moments when we doubt ourselves. It's all part of it.
And that's where those personal qualities we talked about earlier become so important. Courage, that growth mindset, generosity, and constantly looking at ourselves to see how we can improve. We need those things to get through the tough times.
Yeah, they help us not just survive, but actually get better when things are hard. We adapt, we learn from mistakes, and we keep going with purpose. Like Psalm 18.2 says, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield, and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold."
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Professor Hsu's succession secrets, we want to leave you with one last thought-provoking question. Professor Hsu never actually says who this book is for. Maybe he did that on purpose.
Maybe these secrets aren't just for a certain group of people or a specific type of organization. Maybe they're for all of us. Maybe they're a guide to building a better future, one that's built on purpose, sustainability, and really understanding what it means to be human. Professor Hsu hints at this at the end of the book.
It's like he's saying, here are the tools, here are the ideas, now go make something amazing. It's a call to action to create a legacy that truly matters.
So we ask you, our listeners, what are you going to do with these secrets? How will you use them in your own life, your work, and your hopes for the future?
That's up to you to decide. But we hope that this deep dive has given you the knowledge, the inspiration, and the push you need to embrace these ideas and build a legacy that makes a real difference. Thanks for joining us.